Welcome to the Demystifying Technology podcast from the MacLaurin Group.
Typically, you go through the due diligence process. What the world of private equity?
Right. Can't wait. Demystify it.
Is it a painful, manual, time-consuming, or non-existent process for your IT team to trace a problem back to its source? In this podcast, Alan and Ryan discuss the importance of good logging practices and outline 3 litmus tests to evaluate if your enterprise logging system is heading in the right direction.
Welcome back. We are here for another episode of Demystifying Technology. Ryan, we're here to talk about logging, your favourite subject.
I do love me a good logging system.
Well, outside of security, where you beat us over the head about every time you can utter a password in the open.
Yes, but security has its fundamentals nowadays, as been shown, but many have breached.
So enterprise logging, it's the one thing that we all say we do, but we don't often see great examples of everybody doing it to its fullest, but we seem to have a fear of doing it.
Yeah, I think that's just one of those cases of nobody, until you step into that world, it's hard to quite appreciate what a good logging system can get you. And so everybody kind of feels like, well, we're able to respond to issues just by hopping on the box, looking at logs, doing that sort of stuff. But once you start moving into larger scale systems, and especially when you start moving into the cloud, that way of looking at logs just doesn't scale effectively.
Yes, gone are the days we just do like a simple tail of an access log or an application log.
Yeah, you need that Linux expert that knows how to hop on and start running like special commands to be able to find the particular log you're looking for. Yeah, it gets to be a bit painful.
So what we're going to do with this particular talk is we're going to come up with sort of the top 3 guidelines or litmus tests to figure out if you're doing logging correctly to the point of where you can actually get some value out of it. But we'll do that towards the end. So let's talk about some of the sort of fundamentals of logs, because it's not simply doing a console out or a printf out to a log file or a simple file. There's a little nuance associated with it. So let's talk about some of that. So the first thing we talk about is, what do we log?
Yeah, so fundamentally what you're trying to do here is output enough information that if an issue arises, you're able to troubleshoot it, right? So if something happens, I want to be able to track it from the beginning to the end to effectively where the error occurred. So I know what was the request that came in, what was the series of like applications it went through as part of that process, and eventually once it actually errors, how did it blow up? What was the error message associated with that? But it's that kind of being able to trace throughout the system what's going on. And to that end, with a good logging framework, you shouldn't really be afraid to log too much. Systems and logging frameworks have gotten very efficient, so it isn't this whole case of, oh no, logging is going to slow down my system anymore.
And I think that's a huge fallacy.
Yeah, it used to be the case. Yeah, but that's all been pretty much optimized out where you don't have to worry about that anymore. And then it is just simply a case of being able to output the proper context to know what happened effectively. So if you get asked that question of what went wrong, what happened to cause that issue, and then hopefully you can go back and fix what went wrong.
And that's usually when you discover you've never really logged enough.
Yeah, that's right.
There's a little black hole in your sort of investigation to figure out if I'd only known what the CPU was doing in this particular box or what the network level was doing here, there's always a black hole.
Yeah.
And I think...
And that, to be honestly, like most things, I would say this is always a refinement process. So
you should never feel like you need to get it right out of the gate.
No, it's going to always be a case of you think you have enough, and then there's always going to be something that crops up down the road where it's like, we are missing it here. But the important thing is to then take the step of filling in that black hole of saying, okay, well, we were missing this piece of information. It can't help us in the past, but let's go ahead and make sure that we have the information going forward so it doesn't happen again.
Yeah, and before we leave the sort of the what to log, it's important also to be a little bit conscious of the type of data you log, because you don't want to be logging passwords or credentials, for example.
Yeah, because I mean, effectively, at that point, what you're doing is you're creating another system where you have to be really sensitive of who has access to it, and you kind of want your logging enterprise system to be obfuscated enough in terms of PII data, that sort of stuff, to where kind of any support person can come in and help troubleshoot. You don't want to have to start worrying about, okay, this is another data leak potential where I need to make sure it's encrypted and I need to be monitoring every person that's accessing it. And you've seen in the past, like I know one of them that hit a big company in the past was Facebook, for example. Facebook didn't realize some of their logging framework was capturing personal identifiable information, and they had to back that one out. And so yeah, ideally it's non-sensitive information going into your.
Well, there was another company, the Wise Networks was also another one that Elasticsearch was somebody forgot to
leave it open,
logging stuff. So again, always good to keep it. So the next evolution from that is something that we consider log levels. Now, us Java people are very familiar with the sort of severe warning info, config, etc. But talk a little bit about levels and how best to utilize that, and some of the guidelines that we have used in the past.
Sure. So with logging levels, it's effectively a high-level classification of your log where you're kind of saying, okay, if I output a log with a particular level, it has this kind of meaning to the support personnel. So at its smallest level, what you would have is what we kind of historically call a debug level log. And to be honest, most of debug level logging is not enabled all the time because this is where you're effectively going to flip the switch and say, I need all the output to really start figuring out this nuanced problem.
Now let's talk about that flipping the switch here. So when we're writing code, for example, we do log.level or log.debug, depending on the framework, etc.
Yeah.
Now what we're saying is we can leave that in the code, even in production, but it's somebody else that controls the level to which we're actually going to record that detail. So it becomes like a benign call.
Yeah, it's effectively a configuration parameter where somebody underneath the covers has an if statement that says, okay, if your level is this, then start outputting these particular levels onwards. You can almost think of it, we always associate words to the level because we're humans and it's easier to understand, but you can almost think of it as a 0, 1, 2, 3, so you're going on up the scale, and so you set a level to say, okay, anything above this scale is now going to start being output, but you can tune where on that scale you're outputting logs.
Yeah, and historically we don't usually log debug in a production environment. That's more for what's going on there. But let's talk about the other end of the spectrum, which is a severe.
Right. So at the complete other end is what we call more of a severe or error log, and that's the one where this is something that has gone wrong in the program that generally requires manual intervention. But if you output an error log, that should be an immediate signal to a human that somebody needs to investigate this and look at it. Pulling that back a little bit, which you get into is what we generally call like a warning log. And that's what more of, okay, the system encountered an error. It was able to maybe recover or continue on, or it wasn't quite as critical. So one of these happening probably doesn't require a human, but enough of them would start to require a human.
Yes, and we start to see a profile of when we do see a severe, we can sometimes see a history of a number of warnings creeping up. So, for example, disk space going out of sight. You may have a warning that, I'm at 80% disk space, or I'm at 70%, or 90%, 95%. Oh, now I've got a severe because I can't actually write that file anymore. So
it's that building up of mass, effectively.
Yes.
Okay, we've hit critical mass. I need a human to help me out.
And we've seen before in the past where people have, and historically you'd put this into like a try-catch. You'd always log everything that was in the catch stuff, right? But where we've seen where people forget about is the good old-fashioned info log. Just give me that sanity that something is actually running. Yeah. That class or that functionality or that endpoint or that piece of code actually just got hit. Yeah. As opposed to assuming that it got hit. Because a lot of those infos is again building up that picture of when you go back in to look at that forensic, what happened here. Oh yeah, it did get there. It did get there. Oh wait a minute. That module should have been called, but I see no trace of. Yeah,
it's that's getting your traceability information, and I will say from the get-go that's probably the hardest thing when you're first getting in here is defining what's the proper output. But I always err on the case of maybe toss a little bit more out there because you can always tune it back. I'd rather have the information and realize, okay, we don't really need that. I can tune it back as opposed to being on the other side of it. I wish I would have logged that.
And that's always the case, isn't it? You get into production, a hell of a problem has happened, you think, if I could just shoot that. So that's from a programming point of view, but from a sort of logging like the CPU load or the network load or the memory usage, etc. That's usually more in the info.
That's usually in there, and that's what we generally call. So you're usually collecting what I would consider kind of application log data, which is more of just what we're talking about, like something that's been programmed, or it could be something like an Nginx access log, that sort of data. And then you have the other side of log data, which is metrics, right? So it's more than just more numbers and
What's the
minutia.
environment?
Exactly. What was the CPU? What was the memory? You can even have stuff like how many requests were coming in, all of that sort of stuff. And that tends to be more just an info. That's giving you context around what's going on. Obviously, you can still hook alerts and that sort of stuff onto it, but you're more just collecting data. It's up to somebody else to interpret it.
Yeah. So we've talked about that. We've talked about detail. We've talked about info. So let's talk about retention. How long should I keep my logs for?
So I'd say there's really two levels to this that you're looking to when you're figuring out your logging system of how long should data live. First is, how long am I keeping this data readily accessible? So if you're storing this data in Elasticsearch or somewhere else, like how long is that data actually in there where I can immediately hop in and start searching it? And most of the time when we're looking at, it's probably going to be like a 30 to 90 day window for most shops. Some shops may go a little bit longer than that. But it's effectively, when you need to troubleshoot a problem, you're going to hop in.
Yeah.
Most of the time, if you're getting asked to troubleshoot a problem that's more than 90 days out, it's not an immediate concern. Yeah, you got to be able to answer the question, but you don't need to hop on it just that second. So usually that window gives you that. The other side of it is you're more what I would consider like kind of your backup window, right? Because you want to maybe retain that data significantly longer to be able to answer those questions, say, okay, looks like maybe we had a random access about 6 months ago, or we think we may have gotten penetrated 3 or 4 months ago.
Yeah.
Start wanting to be able to look at that log data. So that's where you're probably storing it up on S3 or some other backup service where you got to load that data back in to be able to go through it, but you still have it. And that's just purely down to how long do you want to be able to look at that data, and that could go for years.
Yeah, but most of the time you don't need to go that far.
Usually
back.
not.
Like,
It all depends on what your use case is.
etc. Okay, so and a big mistake that we often see is that log data should be not something you look at when something goes wrong.
No. You should generally, once you start getting good output of log data, you should be able to start hooking on tools to this data and being able to get alerts to say, okay, we just had a severe in production. That should be triggering an alert to the support team to say, hey, somebody should go look at this. Or we had X number of warnings in the past 5 minutes. That feels a bit off. Somebody should go look at that. CPU on this box has reached 70%. So it's taking that data now and starting to put the monitoring tools on top of the data so that you can start getting the alerts and start being more active, responsive as opposed to passive.
Yes, and you're also getting a sense of your enterprise's personality.
Mm-hmm.
How does everything look and feel under normal conditions?
Mm-hmm.
Is the fact that the CPU is topped out at 90% at a given time of the day because it's doing some reporting, that's okay.
Right,
that we're acceptable there.
Yeah.
Or in the morning we see spikes, but that's again okay. So again, you're getting a sense of normality through your logs, etc. So let's bring this back to the top 3 items that we can sort of measure ourselves against to know if we're doing a good logging.
Yep.
So the first one we've called diversity of source.
Yeah. So this is effectively, you want all your variety of sources of information going into one spot. So this is your applications, all that log data that your programmers have generated going to the spot, all your system log data. So this is probably more like the CPU metrics, that sort of information. All your cloud data, if you're running in the cloud or if you're running in a data center, collecting information kind of from that environment in terms of what's going on. All the way down to if you are running a web application server, what's your request log, right? So if it's a load balancer or an Nginx or something, like collecting effectively all that data into one spot.
And if you find yourself when you're sort of going through this stuff, going out to another source, then that's your sort of red flag to say.
Effectively to me is if at any point you're answering a support question, you realize, I need to go SSH onto a box or go look at this other spot. That's a source of information you now want to start hooking in and pumping into your centralized logging place.
So we want everything in one place, so we've got one tool set that we're looking against there. Okay. The next number 2 is accessibility of data.
Right. So this goes off again, that all going into one spot. So this is your ability to hop into a single system or platform, whatever you would call it, to view that data. And this is where you're starting to be able to do reporting on the data. So a good one for this that we a lot of times use, because we're a big fan of the Elastic Stack. So for us, it tends to be Kibana.
Yep.
So there's that UI that we can go into and allows pretty much anybody to start click around, view the data, create dashboards with visualizations about all this data. Because I mean, sure, you can sit there and look at the actual CPU metric logs, but it doesn't mean a whole lot to you.
No, I need to overlay that with what was going on at the time.
Yeah.
What else was going on in the system, and
And you want to be able to see it on a timeline where it's, again, trying to pull together that trend, right? Like, is this normal for the past 24 hours or the past week? Like, what is the trend over time? And really the only way us as humans can interpret that is some form of visualization of a graph, whether that be an area chart, whatever. And so it's, again, effectively putting a reporting framework on top of your log data to actually start getting some accessibility and use it.
And many of these logging tools, as you said, we use ELK, Elasticsearch, etc., have a good source of reporting, that sort of visualization there. So that's a very important one there. So lastly, the number 3 is actionable data.
Right. So now that you've collected all the data, you're able to kind of build these dashboards and view the data and access the data. The next bit is to actually start actioning on it. So that's where, again, if we start seeing X number of severes or X number of warnings, we want to send out an alert, whether that be an email, a text message, a Slack message, and whatever it is that, however your support team effectively works and responds to issues, you want those alerts and stuff going out to them. It shouldn't be a case of, oh, Bill needs to wake up in the middle of the night to check to make sure the servers are running anymore. It's okay, we're collecting all that data, now let's put the rest of the tools on top of it so that he gets warned of, hey, here's this potential issue.
And I think that's a very important point to sort of reinforce. A good logging framework will alert the team as opposed to waiting for somebody to go and check a website to do the sort of, every hour we're going to have a quick look to make sure everything's fine. In many respects, it should never be looked at after production, after you've got your personality set up. It should then be telling you, hey.
And it was kind of like your earlier litmus test in terms of, okay, if you have to go and access a log in order, then that needs to be a source name to your system. This is almost another litmus test. If you have a customer contacting you about an issue, that means, okay, here's a new alarm or monitor or something we need to be watching for to say, okay, in the future, we should already kind of be ahead of the game. We should know that, oh, we expect this customer to reach out to us because we've already seen the warning and gotten the alert of the fact that they encountered a problem.
And I think, we'll publish these top 3 litmus tests, but ultimately what we found is that the vast majority of shops are already sitting on this data. Mm-hmm. They just haven't managed the data by bringing it together into a world that they can actually make that data work for the production environment.
Yeah, because everybody knows they need to be able to support systems, right? So it's just right now a lot of what we see is it's a lot more of that passive. You're responding to an issue as opposed to being alert, as opposed to you knowing about it ahead of time. Somebody's calling you and say, hey, your server's down, or I just had this issue logging in, or this page just errored for me. So you're responding to the customer, so you got to have that passive. Like, no, go on the offensive. Be able to start dealing with those issues before your customers are getting in touch with you.
I like that. Go on the offensive, not the defensive. And for that, we'll round up. Thank you very much, and see you next time.
Yeah. Till then.